Hi there. My name is Stephen Chu, and I'm a professor of psychology. I study how to make teaching and learning more effective. I want to talk to you today about how to learn in pandemic times. I know we're facing a lot of uncertainty in this upcoming semester about how we'll learn and where we'll learn. But regardless of the place you find yourself in, learning only takes place in one location, and that's inside your brain. If you understand the principles of how the brain learns, then you'll be able to adapt to whatever situation you might find yourself in. So the information I'm going to talk about today is useful in any learning situation, but you should especially keep this in mind in times of uncertainty like what we're facing right now. So let's talk about how the brain learns. I'm going to start with a simplified version of an information processing model of memory. The information processing model is a convenient way of organizing information, presenting the basic concepts of how people learn. We start over here on the left with learning material. This is what you're trying to learn, the textbook, the lecture presentation, whatever it is you're trying to learn out in the environment. And it comes into us through our senses, or vision and hearing. And it makes it to the first of three memories in the information processing model: sensory memory. Sensory memory just holds all the incoming sensory information until you select some of it for further processing. Then we get to attention, and this is the first really critical part of the information processing model for learning. Attention takes all the sensory information and selects a very small portion of it for further processing. So it allows us to sort of focus in on certain stimuli and basically block out irrelevant stimuli. That's the first thing it does. Attention also has a second important function for learning, and that is it allows us to concentrate, to focus our mental effort to understand what it is we're seeing. So when you're studying, when you're learning, some concepts are very difficult to understand, and you have to really study with full concentration and focus. So that's the second aspect of attention. So attention takes all that sensory information and it pares it down to a very small part, allows you to concentrate on it, and it transfers it to the second memory in the system, which is working memory. You may have heard of short-term memory. Working memory is basically the same thing. Working memory is the only memory with a capacity limitation. It's the only memory where you have this bottleneck where you have trouble getting information through. It's our conscious memory. So whenever you're thinking about things, then by definition, you're using your working memory. So the working memory will consciously organize information, rehearse information, and if it rehearses the information in the proper way, then the information is transferred to long-term memory. Long-term memory is our permanent storehouse of knowledge, and the whole goal of education is to take information that you're learning about and move it through the system all the way to long-term memory to make it permanent. So it would be great if we could just simply absorb information instantly and effortlessly into our long-term memory, but you know that's not the case. There are a number of challenges along the way that students have to deal with in order to learn successfully. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about the choke points and the pitfalls involved in learning. Okay, so a choke point in learning is a constraint. It's a limitation in the information processing system. It's what prevents you from just moving an unlimited amount of information from the environment into your long-term memory. There are certain parts which are severely limited and you have to learn to cope and deal with. So let's look at the 4 choke points in learning. The first 2 choke points actually have to do with attention. And each one has to do with the 2 aspects of attention. So the first choke point we're going to talk about is that narrow focus of attention that limits learning. As I mentioned before, attention selects certain information for further processing. The metaphor that's often used for attention is like it's a small light in a dark room. Attention is a very narrow focus, and it allows you to be aware of only a very small portion of the environment at any given time. Anything outside of your focus of attention, you're not going to really be able to pay attention to. You're not going to be aware of it. But what's really important for students to understand is that you're not aware of everything that you're missing. So you think you're seeing the entire scene when in fact you're only paying attention to a very small portion. A lot of things can happen outside your focus of attention, and you'll miss it. So what that means for studying is that if you are dividing your attention between two different tasks or two different sources of information, like what you're supposed to be paying attention to, like your lecture, and then something you're not supposed to be paying attention to, like your social media, then you're missing a lot, because anything that pulls that focused attention away from what you're supposed to be paying attention to will really hurt your learning. And the key point here is you have no idea of how much you're missing. You may actually think you're learning everything, but you're actually missing a lot. So the only way around this choke point is to avoid distractions, to be fully present whenever you're in a learning situation. So whether online or in class, if you're supposed to be listening to a presentation, be fully focused as much as possible on that presentation, and try and pick up as much information as you can. If you distract yourself, you'll be missing a lot more than you really think. The second choke point has to do with the second aspect of attention. That's mental effort or concentration. The important thing to remember here is that concentration or mental effort is a limited resource. We only have a limited amount of concentration or mental effort available to us that we can use to try and understand concepts. So think about like taking an exam, a difficult exam. You're fully concentrating on it. You're using all of your concentration on it. Anything that takes away from that concentration, like the person next to you tapping their pencil on the desk or something like that, is really annoying, because it's taking away from that limited amount of concentration that you want fully focused on that exam. The same is true with learning. Some concepts that you'll learn are very complicated. It takes full concentration to learn those. Sometimes if the class is going really fast, you get overwhelmed. Or if the professor is trying to introduce too many different concepts at once, then you get overwhelmed because you're trying to do too much. You don't have sufficient amount of concentration or mental effort to carry out all the tasks you're trying to do. So when you're learning, when you're studying, you need to have study with full focus to allow all of your concentration to be used to learn the information. If you're distracted, or if you're trying to like do 2 or 3 different tasks at once, then that's going to take away from the concentration. It's really going to hurt your studying. Now, how do we get around this limitation in mental effort or concentration? Well, we use deliberate practice. So we practice using and recalling and applying information over and over again. The more you practice, the more you learn, and keep on practicing, then the more automatic information will become. Automatic information is less effortful. So instead of learning information just to where you barely know it, what you need to do is overlearn that information to practice using it until you become really good at recalling and applying that information. The more you do it, the less mental effort will be required to understand, recall, and apply that information. The third choke point has to do with working memory and its limited capacity. Working memory has a capacity limit of about 4 chunks of information. So a chunk is composed of information that's kind of coherent, that's organized, but we only have 4 chunks of information. So you've probably experienced going up against your working memory when you study for an exam. So you're trying to cram information through. It's really effortful because of that limited capacity of working memory. And what you realize is that you can't remember what you studied just a few minutes before. That's another aspect of working memory. Forgetting is pretty rapid in working memory. If you stop rehearsing information, forgetting will take place in a matter of seconds. So you have this limited capacity of information. And what a lot of students do to try and get around this is they just simply practice over and over again. So they'll use flashcards or something similar, and they'll just repeatedly try and cram that information through. That's actually not the most efficient strategy to use to get information through working memory. The way you do it is through something called chunking, where you organize information into meaningful units, into large chunks of information. So working memory has a capacity limit of 4 chunks, but the amount of information in a chunk depends on how well you can organize that information. You can have really huge chunks. And so 4 really big chunks gets information through working memory a lot faster than 4 really small chunks. Let me show you what I mean. So let's say you're trying to learn a list of 20 food words here. So what a lot of students would do is they'd immediately go to flashcards and just simply try to learn through practice and drill and practice and drill. It's slow, it's painful, and when you learn it, all you've done is memorize the words. You haven't really understood anything about the words or the relationship among the words, which is often how we're tested when you're in school. A better way of doing this is to look at the list and see if you can organize it into meaningful chunks like these. So we can take these 20 words and we can organize them into 4 different chunks. A chunk for salad, and all these words relate to salad. Sundae, all these words relate to Sunday. Nachos, and then sushi. So we've taken 20 words and we've organized them and reduced it down to 4 chunks. So my chunks have a lot of information in them, and we can get information through working memory. When we're trying to study the individual words, then we had 20 chunks, which far exceeded the capacity of working memory. If we can organize information into meaningful chunks, then we can get a lot more information through working memory. So when you study, you need to try and create big chunks of information. Now, here's the catch. Where does this knowledge come from that allows you to organize information into chunks? It comes from long-term memory. It comes from what we already know. So if you don't know anything about nachos, then you can't organize a chunk of information for nachos. So this leads to a very counterintuitive aspect of working memory. The more you know, the easier it is to learn. Right? And so what that means for college students is that when you take an introductory course, a lot of times the introductory course is more difficult and challenging than an advanced course. Because in an advanced course, you already have a lot of background knowledge about an area, a subject, and you can create big chunks and get information through working memory. In an introductory course, you have these small chunks of information, and it's much harder to get it through working memory. So what you need to do in an introductory course is really spend time trying to organize information into meaningful chunks. It's more effort to do that sort of thing, but it leads to the best long-term recall. So focus on creating big chunks. One other thing I want to mention about these chunks is that they are distinctly different from each other, which really helps out in our next choke point, what I'm about to get to. This distinctiveness means that they're not confusable with each other. They're very distinctive. No one confuses nachos and sushi. If I had picked chunks like a sundae and a banana split, then that would not be as distinctive, and that really wouldn't be as good about learning. So coherent chunks that hang together and that are distinctive from other chunks. Okay, so the fourth choke point has to do with forgetting. Forgetting can occur at any point in the system, and obviously that's a real problem for learning. So how do you prevent forgetting? Well, there are 2 ways to help prevent forgetting. Number 1 is that distinctiveness, what I just talked about. The more distinctive your chunks are or your memories are, the more resistant they are to forgetting. They're less likely to interfere with other kinds of memories, and they're going to be more resilient, more resistant to interference and forgetting. Another way of helping with preventing forgetting is overlearning. The same thing we talked about back over here with mental effort and concentration. So if you overlearn information, then that memory will be stronger and it'll be more resistant to forgetting. So there's 2 different ways of trying to prevent forgetting. So those are the choke points of learning, the constraints we have to deal with. Now I want to talk about pitfalls in learning. So pitfalls in learning have to do with common mistakes that students make that undermine their learning. Okay, so these are traps that you should avoid if you want to study effectively. And there are 3 of those pitfalls. The first pitfall has to do with attention, and it has to do with multitasking, either trying to switch from one task to another, or doing multiple tasks at the same time, or trying to pay attention to multiple sources of information at the same time. Multitasking is very harmful for learning. It really undermines learning. We are not built to multitask. We think we're good at it because we do it all the time, but actually whenever you compare your performance multitasking to simply focusing on one task at a time, you are much more effective when you focus on one task at a time. So any sort of distractions or trying to spread your attention over multiple tasks is going to hurt you. It hurts you so much that you're much better off focusing with full attention on what you're doing for a period of time, and then allowing yourself a break where you do all those distractions and temptations that were threatening your focus, and then go back to studying with full focus. So what you want to do is remove the distractions in order to study with full focus. So try and remove those temptations completely from your study environment. Don't just study with your phone right in front of you. Put it in a drawer, put it in the next room. Try and eliminate it completely from your study situation. Okay, so that's the first pitfall. The second pitfall has to do with learning strategies. You've got to use the right kind of learning strategies in order to transfer information from working memory over to long-term memory. The problem here is that the most popular learning strategies that students use are the least effective for transferring information to long-term memory. The reason for that is that these bad study strategies typically are easy to do. So they involve like mindlessly rereading information or mindlessly highlighting information or just staring at your notes over and over again without really thinking about them. You can study long and hard doing that. You really won't learn anything meaningful from that. What you need to do is to use effective study strategies. Effective study strategies usually involve creating meaning or understanding the meaning of the information and organizing the information in a way that makes it coherent. Chunking, what I talked about before, is a very effective study strategy. So if you think about the meaning of the information, if you elaborate upon it, if you make a lot of associations with other information you know, that's a very effective study strategy. There are other effective study strategies that involve retrieving and using the information, the very same thing you were doing back over here to deal with the choke point of mental effort, that sort of deliberate practice where you practice recalling and applying information. That's a very effective strategy. A lot of effective strategies involve forgetting, not just forgetting, but forgetting and relearning. So you allow yourself, you study, you allow yourself to forget, and then you relearn the information. So if you space out your studying, so you study a subject for a while, then you take a break, and then you come back to it and you review what you learned, you've given yourself a chance to forget the information, and relearning information actually makes it stronger. Another way of accomplishing that is by switching between topics. So you study for one class for a while, then you switch to a different class, you come back to that first class and you sort of review what it is you learned before, then you go back to that second class, you review what you learned there. It allows you to forget and relearn, and it's a very effective study strategy, right? So you have to learn effective study strategies to use for long-term learning. And that kind of leads into the third pitfall, which is overconfidence. Okay? A lot of times students are really overconfident in what they know. So this involves a concept we call metacognition, which has to do with your awareness of your own level of understanding. Students often have very poor metacognition. They're overconfident, which means they don't study enough. They stop before they actually really understand the information. They think they understand it when really their understanding is very shallow and has a lot of gaps in it. What happens is they don't study adequately for exams. They take the exam, they're confident, and they're just shocked when they don't do well. So if this happens to you, it means that you are overconfident and you've fallen into this pitfall of overconfidence. Overconfidence is a direct result of poor study strategies. So the hallmark of a poor study strategy is that it builds your confidence without actually increasing learning, and it makes you overconfident. It messes up your metacognition. So how do we guard against that kind of overconfidence? Well, the thing to do is to find ways to assess your own understanding. Perhaps your professor has activities in class where you have to test yourself and apply information. That's a great source of feedback. Use the feedback from those kinds of activities to determine what you understand and what you really need to focus on. Perhaps your professor gives you like a practice test to use. Use that feedback from that practice test to diagnose what you really need to work on. What you want to be able to do is to be able to apply the information, use the information in the way you're going to be expected to use it on the exam or whatever other kind of assessment your professor is going to use. And there are plenty of sources for that kind of self-testing. So a lot of times there's end of chapter review questions, or the textbook may have a website with practice questions on it. Or you can just ask your classmates to test each other, to come up, or everyone comes up with questions to ask each other. But try and use self-testing to assess how well you really understand material and get some objective evidence of what you know and what you really need to work on. So those are the three pitfalls in learning. Let's kind of review what it is we talked about. There are four choke points in learning: the narrow focus of attention, the limited mental effort or concentration of attention, the limited capacity working memory for chunks, and then rapid forgetting. Right? So those are the choke points. Those are the constraints and limitations in the system that you've got to cope with. Then there are three pitfalls. There's multitasking and distractions, there's poor learning strategies, and there's overconfidence or poor metacognition. So those are the pitfalls you have to avoid. So if you look at this overall chart, you can see the choke points and the pitfalls you have to be aware of and the challenges they pose. But I've also given you a solution for each of these choke points and pitfalls that you can use to improve the effectiveness of your studying. So if you'd like to learn more about the concepts I've talked about here, I have a free video series on YouTube, and I encourage you to check it out. Now, in order to help you learn the information in this video, I've got two sets of review questions for you. I'm about to show you, and I'll just put them on the screen for about 5-10 seconds each. You can pause and you can write them down if you want to, but you should be able to answer all the questions in this review in order to really know if you've mastered the information that I've presented to you. And then I'll end after those review questions with the whole graphic of the choke points and the pitfalls again. So thank you for paying attention, and I wish you the very best in the upcoming semester.